Imagine that what you know about Christmas might turn out to be completely different than you thought. Did Christians really copy pagan holidays? Do Mithras, Horus, and Sol Invictus have anything to do with December 25th? Or is the truth something entirely different? In this video, we'll go back to the oldest sources, uncover forgotten facts, debunk internet myths, and show that the history of Christmas is much older and deeper than commonly believed. If you want to know where this date really comes from, what the early Christians said about it, and why it holds such great significance, keep watching. Now the true story begins. Many people believe that the Romans established Christmas to replace the local festival of Saturnalia. To understand whether this is true, we first need to know what that holiday was about. Saturnalia was one of the most important and oldest Roman festivals, celebrated in honor of the god Saturn, the patron of agriculture. Depending on the period, Saturnalia could last from a single day up to a full week. At times, it was celebrated continuously from December 17th to the 23rd. The festival was widely observed throughout the Roman Empire, wherever Roman administration was present. The earliest mentions of Saturnalia date back to the Republican period, and the tradition remained alive for centuries. The festival began to fade only in the 4th to 5th centuries, when Christianity became the dominant religion and Emperor Theodosius I banned pagan cults. However, Saturnalia was not abolished by a single edict. Instead, it gradually disappeared in the 5th century, replaced by new religious practices. The atmosphere of the festival was unique. Social roles were reversed. Slaves were granted freedom for the occasion. Masters symbolically served them. Sigillaria, clay figurines, were exchanged. Candles were lit, feasts were held, and jokes were shared. This joyful holiday, marked by social inversion, became one of the most distinctive traditions of the Roman calendar. Although it had no direct connection to the Christian celebration of Christmas, despite later speculations arising from the closeness of dates. In its character, it more closely resembled the modern-day carnival. Another Roman festival that often appears in discussions about Christmas is the feast in honor of the god Sol Invictus. The god Sol was the personification of the sun in Rome, but he was not the same deity as Apollo, although in the later empire they were sometimes merged. Apollo had been for centuries the Greek god of light, art, music, and prophecy, whom the Romans incorporated into their pantheon, whereas Sol was a distinctly Roman solar and state deity. In practice, the cult of Apollo was often much more popular, especially from the time of Augustus, who made him one of his patrons. Sol, on the other hand, had his own more modest festivals already during the Republican period, including in August and October, which, according to available evidence, were taken more seriously and celebrated more intensely than the later festival of Sol Invictus, which took place in December. The feast of Dies Natalis Solis Invicti was only introduced in 274 AD by Emperor Aurelian. But this cult mainly spread in the center of the empire, not on its outskirts. Saturnalia was universal, whereas Sol Invictus remained a rather elitist and urban celebration, and its popularity never matched that of the cult of Apollo, or the earlier Roman traditions connected with Sol. Importantly, despite frequent modern claims that the Sol Invictus festival was widely celebrated on December 25th, the only actual document confirming this date is a 4th century Christian calendar known as the Chronograph of 354, which mentions in the margin that Natalis Invicti was celebrated on December 25th. And that's all. There is no other document on the matter. We have no descriptions of ceremonies, rituals, or any specific details. Compared to the rich documentation concerning Saturnalia, Sol Invictus is surprisingly poorly attested in the sources, which further suggests that it was not a particularly important festival for the average Roman citizen. Moreover, The fact that Seoul had other, much better documented festivals in August and October indicates that those celebrations held greater significance in traditional Roman religiosity than the later imperial feast of Sol Invictus. Why later? Because it was only introduced in 274 AD. Meanwhile, mentions of the Christmas feast celebrated by Christians on December 25th appeared significantly earlier. The earliest confirmed reference to December 25th as the date of Jesus' birth comes from around 200 AD from Sextus Julius Africanus. Likewise, Hippolytus of Rome, who died in 235 AD, explicitly wrote about this date as the day of Jesus' birth. This was therefore several decades earlier than the establishment of the Sol Invictus festival in Rome. Moreover, these are only the texts known to us today. It is possible that this date was known to Christians much earlier. The previously mentioned liturgical calendar of the Western Church, the chronograph of 354, shows that by the mid-4th century, Christmas was already being regularly celebrated on December 25th in Rome, alongside the notation of the Natalis Invicti festival. A comparison of these dates clearly shows that the Christian tradition of celebrating December 25th is older than the state holiday of Sol Invictus, and the later parallel appearance of both dates in the chronograph of 354 simply reflects the coexistence of two independent traditions, not a case of one borrowing from the other. Can we then conclude that Christians copied this holiday? Looking at the available sources, there is no basis for such a claim. The cult of Sol Invictus was relatively late, poorly documented, and by no means among the most important Roman celebrations. Its date, December 25th, is attested in the sources only once, and even then indirectly and quite late. Meanwhile, Christians had been celebrating the birth of Jesus on December 25th much earlier. It is therefore more likely that the coincidence of dates stems not from copying, but from parallel traditions rooted in shared patterns of thought common to antiquity. What was so special about this date? Simply that it marked the winter solstice, the point at which the days begin to grow longer. Such significant days, connected to the cycles of nature and the positions of the moon and sun, were often treated as special across many cultures, and there is nothing unusual about that. It's also worth noting that centuries ago, the Julian calendar was in use, and the winter solstice fell on December 25th. Today, it occurs on December 21st or 22nd, but that's because we now use the Gregorian calendar. Why do Christians celebrate Christmas on December 25th? Is it only because the winter solstice occurs around that time? The internet is full of false claims, suggesting that other gods, such as Mithras and Horus, were also born on that day, and that Christians merely copied it. But Mithras and Horus are two very different gods from entirely separate cultures, Persian and Egyptian, and neither of them had a birth celebration on December 25th. The claims circulating online are the result of much later, mostly 19th and 20th century speculations that have no basis in ancient sources. To understand where the date of December 25th came from in Christian tradition, one must know that, according to an ancient Jewish way of thinking, great prophets lived complete years, meaning they died on the same date they were conceived. In the 3rd century, it was widely believed that Jesus was crucified on March 25th. Therefore, if he lived a full number of years, it was also believed that he was conceived on March 25th, since in antiquity, life was counted from conception, not from birth. Adding 9 months to that brings us to December 25th as the date of his birth. Of course, we do not know whether this date reflects historical reality. It is primarily a piece of ancient theological symbolism. In the Eastern Church, Christmas was celebrated on January 6th. This was based on exactly the same principle, with the only difference being the belief that Jesus was crucified on April 6th rather than March 25th. This tradition is still observed today in the Armenian Church. It's also worth noting that some modern scholars now estimate that the crucifixion took place on April 7th. So when was Jesus really born? The Bible does not provide an exact date, but it does offer some clues. One commonly cited detail is the description of shepherds staying out in the fields and keeping night watch over their flock, which, for some, suggests a warmer time of year. However, Palestine has a Mediterranean climate with mild and wet winters. It is during this season that vegetation is lush enough to make grazing easier than during the hot summer months, when the grass is scorched by the sun. Therefore, the mention of shepherds keeping watch at night does not rule out the possibility of a winter setting. Another clue is the story of Zechariah, the father of John the Baptist. Several details about his life are provided in Scripture that can be fairly precisely placed on a timeline. Some scholars have used this information to estimate the birth of Jesus as occurring in the fall or winter. While this calculation is by no means certain, it does illustrate that we do not know the exact date. However, the biblical data suggest that Jesus' birth more likely took place between autumn and winter, rather than in summer. The fact that we don't know the exact date of Jesus' birth is not all that important. What matters much more is the symbolic meaning of the day. Even in the Old Testament, the Messiah is described as the light of the world and the Son of righteousness. So it's hard to imagine a more fitting date than the moment when darkness begins to give way and the days start to grow longer. The symbolism of Christmas, then, tells a story deeply rooted in human experience. A person lost in darkness and brokenness is in real need of light that can save them. That light is Jesus Christ, who rejects no one, not even the greatest sinner.